Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar of the International Fleet Managers Institute. My name is Steven Schroefs. I am Chief Editor for Fleet Europe, and we are really happy that you can all join this IFMI webinar on Diesel or Petrol, pick the right fuel for your fleet. The International Fleet Managers Institute, or the IFMI, stands for an institute that is dedicated in training and expertise for international fleet managers only. The IFMI also stimulates forward action and it triggers innovative thinking in car fleet management. Last but not least, the IFMI focuses on best practice sharing and interaction. Also in this webinar, you will have the opportunity to learn from recognized fleet experts, and at the end of the webinar there is the possibility to ask your questions to our experts in a lively Q&A. You can do so by sending your questions for the experts using the chat box that you see in the GoToWebinar tool. But first, a little explanation on the topic of today. Diesel or petrol, a topic that deserves attention and is more actual than ever. The IFMI partners believe it is the right time to address the topic in our fleet community, as different elements are encouraging thinking about this issue. To diesel or not to diesel is the question facing fleet managers today, as they weigh the inherent advantages and disadvantages of diesel against those of other fuel types, and against the changing regulatory and fiscal landscape. Of course, diesel remains a popular choice for fleet cars, but across Europe the concern for the environment is getting bigger and bigger, with governments turning up the pressure on diesel, imposing higher taxes and banning them from city centers. This all in an attempt to phase out the fuel that is considered very polluting. But perhaps our governments are overdoing it. From the fleet driver perspective, we also see new mobility patterns, for sure in dense urban centers, where a decrease of the average mileage is witnessed. Well, all these factors lead to a complex picture about the cost effectiveness of the fuel relevant to your situation. So yes, you are in the right webinar. You see on your screen the two experts that are going to lead you through this webinar. First of all, we have Tony Elliott, our global fleet expert at Nexus Communication, who will give you insight in the importance of the TCO concept, also when thinking about your fuel choice. And after that, Denis Ferraud, Head of Consulting Development at Arval, an IFMI partner, will lead you to some concrete examples when choosing the fuel for your fleet. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure now to introduce to you Tony Elliott. He is going to tell you a little bit more about the TCO concept. Tony, welcome. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As Stephen has said, my name is Tony Elliott and I'm with Nexus Communications. Thank you, Stephen. So just a quick reconfirmation as to the TCO, and my question is, so what is the total cost of ownership, which is often referred to as TCO? A TCO is a cost analysis tool that captures all of the operating expenses associated with the entire use of a vehicle during its primary period of use by a corporation. What do I mean by that primary period? When you receive a car from new into a corporation, you use it for a number of years, and then you pass it back into the second-hand car market. That is what I'm referring to as the primary period of use. Thank you. So the vehicle cost area is segmented down to fully appreciate the total cost of a car. Our depreciation, finance, service maintenance and repair, tires, management fees, and what I've done here is I've put a brackets in there which say or true full-time employee costs. Because if you buy your fleet currently for cash, then you need to take into account not just the fleet manager or the procurement manager's employee costs, but also everybody else that touches onto the vehicle fleet. Your accounts department, for example, your car policy team, and anybody else that gets involved temporarily with a fleet. These are full-time employee costs. Fuel, taxes, out-of-contract costs. Even if you do not lease your vehicles, you will, I suspect you will budget in a cost for service, maintenance, repair, depreciation, etc. into your internal budgets, and you will have during the lifetime of a car costs that come up that you did not think were significant or that happen very often. Broken glass is one good example of that. So those are out-of-contract costs. Accident costs, end-of-contract costs, in other words, any cost that occurs that could depreciate the vehicle or require service, maintenance, repair on the vehicle immediately prior to sale that you had not budgeted for, and that is going to bring down the residual value of the vehicle as a result of that physical or mechanical damage. And then your internal administration costs. These are the segments that are in the TCO. And if we have a look at this slide, obviously the total cost of a vehicle during the primary period equals 100%. And these are a typical example. This is a hybrid example, a typical example of the segments and the percentages that relate to those segments. So you see depreciation there is 40%, services 8%, management fees, fuel, and so on, going down to 100%. What's interesting there is that the depreciation and the fuel come to 63% when combined. And that is why this discussion, I believe, is so important, because both of those factors are involved in the petrol versus diesel consideration. Thank you, Stephen. So visually, I don't know if you're like me, but I don't like to look at lots and lots of figures from lots of different places. So visually, a pie chart is the best way to have a look at a TCO. It allows people who are actively involved in vehicles and those that are not actively involved in vehicles on your car policy committee or within your organization to visually see how a car represents itself in a pie chart. Because you will be looking at a lot of these pie charts, I would imagine, when you're trying to determine the future, your future car policy. And it's a very good way for non-specialists in the car fleet to have a look. And you'll see here there that the depreciation and the fuel are shown as the large percentage that they perform within the pie chart. The one thing about this pie chart is to make it as simple as possible. It can be, you can be too clever, I think, and I do see that happening in the industry. Especially as you become more specialized in fleets, you tend to make the pie chart more complex. And I always think it's a good idea to take out those factors that are going to be the same whatever the car, whatever the period, whatever the mileage. Only look at those things that vary because of those factors. Thank you, Stephen. Now, what do I mean by comparative variances? It's a wonderful modeling tool, the TCO. And it gives you an accurate and consistent way in which to measure different methodologies with a vehicle, different vehicles. So you can compare, for example, the same vehicle over different periods of use and total kilometers. So you use the same vehicle for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years duration, depending on your company car policy. And you look at the different kilometers, total kilometers that will occur during those years. You look at the same category of vehicle choice, but different makes and models. So you can compare apples for apples right the way through. and you can see how those vehicles vary. Of course, you have to have the 100% cost there as well, because visually it's good, the TCO, but you need to have the total cost as well in euros. Same as above, but with different fuels, which is particularly important for this discussion today. And of course, countries will vary in residual values for cars. So, for example, if you look at a Fiat the Fiat product in Italy, it is likely to have a very good residual value. But if you look at that Fiat model in Germany or France, they are likely to have different residual values, lower residual values or higher residual values, depending on what the country feels about that car, but also what the country has that they produce that they believe are the car of choice. So you can't just look at one country and make a decision for your car policy across Europe. And the TCO allows you to look at each and every country, each and every model, period, and mileage. It's a very, very good system. Thank you, Stephen. Next slide, please, Stephen. So, as I said before, apples for apples comparisons. You have consistency of measurement, which is very, very important. It captures the true operating costs over a period of use. It's not too complex, and it should be kept not too complex, but it is very accurate. It's visually effective. It's excellent for car policy vehicle choice selection, and it's absolutely perfect for your modeling exercises and for getting your car policy into line throughout Europe. Thank you, Stephen. So everybody, thank you very much for listening to me, and I welcome questions at the end of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony, for your presentation and your insight in the TCO. As a reminder, of course, for the participants, at the end of the webinar there is the Q&A. So if you have a question for Tony, please let us know. Use the chat function in the webinar tool. So now Denis Ferraud of Arval is going to take us really into the topic of fuel, diesel versus petrol. And he will give insight in some, let's say, elements and impact factors that can also have an influence on your decision to take. So, Denis, welcome very much to this webinar, and we are pleased to give you the webinar floor.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and good morning, everyone. So, as Tony clearly explained, selecting a fuel is definitely making comparison, and selecting fuel is also an educated decision. So we are going to see what are the best parameters to take into account to take this decision. And I would use the very classical 3P analysis, planet, price, people, to do this analysis and to select the right balance. On planet, we can also add another P, which is political, and we will see how public powers, how cities, how governments want to influence the choice of the energy in regards to the various pollutants. So on the next slide, we will see that there is, I would say, an ideological war, and because of this common sense or this commonly agreed fact that vehicle pollutes and petrol, diesel, sorry, pollutes more than petrol, we will see exactly what the fact and what we should take over as the real decision-making factor. So the next slide shows us in detail the various impact of the two energies. So, of course, as a professional community, we don't confuse pollutant with greenhouse gas. CO2 is not a pollutant. CO2 is part of the process of global climate change. And if we take 1 liter of petrol, we realize that there is, and it's a chemical fact, there is 2.28 kilograms of CO2. That's the energetical power of the hydrocarbons. So hydrogens and carbon combinate with oxygen to produce CO2 and H2O. H2O, which is the white vapor that we see from the exhaust. It's pure water. So there is 2.28 kilograms as a given chemical fact in 1 liter of petrol, and there is 2.65 kilograms in diesel. Because when crude oil is refined, the heaviest oil generated is diesel, and the lowest oil or lower oil is petrol, with kerosene as a very, very light oil. So in cars, we use, of course, diesel and petrol, but as crude oil is refined, there is as many diesel as petrol that are produced. So because diesel engines are using less fuel than petrol engine, to cover the same distance, and in this example we cover the same distance with the same type of engine, a 130 HP engine, horsepower engine, then we realize that with a petrol car, covering these 100 kilometers will use a certain quantity of petrol, which chemically will produce 129 grams per kilometer. The same logics bears a 104 grams per kilometer for covering 100 kilometers with a diesel engine. So it's a fact that diesel engine emit less CO2 per kilometers than the same equivalent in horsepower petrol engine. And this leads to a very simple conclusion for car manufacturers, for OEM. If they want to achieve their targets in CO2 reduction by 2020, namely an average of 95 grams per kilometers, they strongly have to promote diesel engines that are the best solution to reduce the overall CO2 emission on a given fleet. So now we are looking at the pollutants, and again, CO2 is not a pollutant. So the pollutants that are measured by the Euro norms are NOx, are particulate matters, are CO, and unburned hydrocarbonates. So it's true that old diesel vehicles were highly producing NOx and particulate matters over the last years. But this is not true anymore. The new Euro 6 norms that I've called D6 for diesel Euro 6, as you can see on the graph, the yellow part represents the volumes of pollutants that are tolerated on the new vehicle. And you can see the drastic effort that car manufacturers have made to reduce by, or to divide by 2 the emission of NOx, to divide by 4 the emission of particulate matters. Most of the particulate matters are burned in the particulate filter on diesel vehicle, and we see more and more efficient vehicle. That means the diesel vehicle, the recent diesel vehicle, are really less polluting than the old one, and on average now, since vehicles are kept longer in the cities, renewing diesel vehicle with company car is the best way to accelerate the good production, I would say, or the good results of recent Euro 6 vehicle. Same as CO and hydrocarbonate, unburned hydrocarbonate, you realize that they are much less than petrol vehicle. So in a nutshell, it's true that all the diesel vehicles were massively emitting pollutants. It's not true anymore. And if the diesel vehicle were to be banned from city center, we have to educate political responsible so that they only take into account old diesel vehicle and not the new Euro 6 vehicle. So the city center access is not anymore a problem of of diesel versus petrol. It's old diesel versus new diesel. And if a city wants to ban an energy, actually they should definitely go for either zero-emission vehicle, but this will not solve the problem of circulation, the congestion of the city center. So in this case, why don't they just simply take all the car out of the cities and create new mobility formulas without vehicle? I think this is not the short-term tendency to get rid of all vehicle within city center. So the next slide, we will go further in the comparison and see that actually the cost of the energy itself, the cost of diesel, which in some countries is much cheaper than the cost of petrol, helps selecting this fuel. And also the recent tendency in fuel price, we see that diesel and petrol has never been so cheap as they are today, well, at least over the last 5 years as they are today. And this is not a long-term tendency, but it's a fact that we have to take into account when we calculate TCOs, of course, the fuel price at a given time and its possible evolution over the next 2 to 3 years. So how to select the right vehicle based on the right energy? Of course, CO2 emission will make diesel win, but taxes on CO2 can also be a major decision factor, and there is no such thing as global European taxes. Each country has different taxes and especially different CO2 level taxes, which means a global fleet wants to select one single energy into his local fleet must take into consideration the very strong discrepancies within the tax scheme all over Europe. And they should definitely select country by country the appropriate energy based on this tax and fiscal treatment. So we will see also on the next slide that not only the taxes, not only the fuel cost, but of course the driver behavior influence the selection of the vehicle. Theoretically, of course, the longer mileage covered, the better diesel vehicles are. We all know that corporate drivers, on average, drive more than individuals for their vehicle. Now the average mileage, and I'm taking the French example, has dropped from 12,000 to 8,000 for individual, for non-professional user. And professional user still have a longer mileage covered, almost 25,000 kilometers per year, which strongly militates for the usage of diesel, which for long mileage enjoy a better TCO. And this usage of diesel, and I'm still in France, makes 95% of the French fleet are using diesel for this reason, price of the energy, for long distance, and for the fact that diesel has been incentivized in a company, especially with the VAT treatment. But it's also true that we slowly but surely see the decrease of this share of diesel in the fleet by one-digit figures, which also witness the smaller duration than drivers are covering, and the fact that people are also thinking of the city center limitation to diesel vehicle. So theoretically, diesel should be the winner in this TCO calculation when the tax and the fuel cost allows in most of the country, but we will see that in other countries it's not the case. But practically, we also need to take the real usage of the driver and see how a very sporty type of driving influence the total cost of ownership with a real driving pattern of use, which we are going to see in the next set of slides.
In the next set of slides, we will compare, using the graphic TCO analysis, a mid-size vehicle of 105 horsepower for both its diesel and petrol version in Netherlands in one hand and in France on the other hand. And we will see what are the different impacts from financing, duration, taxes, and driver. So in Netherlands, the petrol version wins by a 13% benefit over the diesel, especially due to the tax effect on the upper left part of the graph. You see that taxes are much more beneficial to petrol vehicle in Netherlands. You also see that driver benefit in kind is favorable to the petrol vehicle. With a 413 euro per month, the driver, the user, will choose a petrol vehicle which is more advantageous than the 495 euro that one would have to pay to use the diesel vehicle. But not only taxes and driver preferences plays for the petrol vehicle, but also the duration. And when we move to a longer duration, and in this case we will move to 40,000 annual kilometers, we see that in this very case, the benefit of the petrol vehicle decrease in favor of the diesel vehicle. We are now with a 6% difference, and of course we know that the longer duration covered, the more advantageous the diesel vehicle is, mainly due to the fuel consumption of the petrol vehicle. We know that a petrol vehicle for the same power will consume more liter per 100 kilometers, thus will emit more CO2 for the same distance. And because of the fuel price is more expensive for petrol than for diesel, the gap is increased for longer duration.
On the next slide, we compare in France petrol versus diesel for a small mileage, 20,000 kilometers per year, and we see that in this case diesel is, as we expected, winning by 13% in TCO the race petrol versus diesel. If we look on the other slide at the driver behavior effect, so then you see that because we've simulated in that model a very aggressive driving pattern, then the fuel used by the driver on a petrol vehicle is much more important than the fuel used on the same diesel vehicle or the same power of vehicle, because as we've already said, the efficiency of diesel vehicle makes consume less fuel, so the amplification of the driver behavior negative effect is much more on a petrol vehicle than on a diesel vehicle. So as a conclusion for this comparison, the first obvious answer to who is the winner is it depends. It depends first on the TCO, the expected TCO. Then, of course, be aware of country specifics, which means tax treatment, which means pump price for the energy, which means VAT recoverability treatments, residual value aspect are different from one country to another. So though you want to do the exercise globally, you definitely need to compare on a country basis the different specification. Then calculate turning points, the distances that should be covered to make one energy more profitable or less costly than the other. And we agree that small engine for low mileage and long duration will be favorable of petrol. And then, last but not least, factor in driver behavior and stimulate the driver impact based on your statistics, and if you know that your drivers are not the most eco driver or trend on eco-driving, eco-friendly programs, there are chances that there will be differences between real life and expected cost, and in this case, most of the time, the differences are in favor of diesel. So to conclude this presentation, I would say that of course, you need to compare on an objective and factual aspect petrol versus diesel to take a local decision and then incorporate them into your global policies. Don't forget the driver behavior effect, but it's not only fact and figures, it's also emotions and it's also short-term political decision that will also drive the decision to select petrol or diesel vehicle. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Denis. Thank you for the presentation. Although that the line was not excellent, our excuses for that. For your information, for the participants, there will be a recorded version that we will put also on the website and on the dedicated IFMI site. And for your convenience, we will also put the PowerPoint presentation, so the slides, on our website so that you have access and you can consult also the information given during this presentation. And if you have a question afterwards, even for sure our experts, they will answer also your questions after this webinar when you have consulted the information and the slides. We are now going into a little Q&A with our experts, so you can ask your questions using the chat function in your GoToWebinar tool. Let me see, I believe we have already some questions that the participants were sending. Okay, the first one perhaps for Denis, although it's not the most easy question I think to answer. Denis, as your sound is not so good, please make sure that the answer is short and clear. The question is, at what mileage would you consider that petrol can be more cost-effective than diesel, taking into consideration tax, including personal taxes, etc.? Do you have an idea about that? Do you see an evolution in that?
Well, as I said, of course, the honest answer is it depends. It depends on the country. It depends on the fuel cost. It depends on the tax structure. But I would say for low duration, for low mileage and long duration, so low mileage probably is something around 8,000, 10,000 kilometers per year. We can start seeing benefits on petrol vehicle and also on small engine with a correct residual value on the market. So the combination of all this, funding, price cost, taxes, and 8,000, 7,000, 8,000 kilometers is a good way to start calculating TCO and see if petrol wins.
Okay, thank you. A question for Tony. Tony, you gave insight in the TCO concept. You also underlined the importance and the added value that can bring the TCO concept when, let's say, benchmarking your car policy and your fleet and to take the right decision. With, let's say, the volatility of the fuel prices that we see now, how do you see, let's say, this question of diesel and petrol? Because we see now that perhaps the fuel cost has decreased in the TCO. So is it for you the right time, let's say, to address this question of diesel and petrol?
Thank you. I think, firstly, that the fuel price currently is unbelievably low, and I don't think we can, this is my personal opinion, I don't think we can be happy that it's going to stay that way. But then the cost is likely to rise for both petrol and diesel. So the proportions would remain the same. If we look 5 years back, I think Denny will agree, if we look 5 years back when fuel costs were high, diesel was still the efficient engine of choice for those people doing, let's say, over 8,000 kilometers per year. I think what is more interesting at the moment is the what I would call in English the huff and puff of the EU and the governments, because they are getting very excited about the diesel, in many cases incorrectly so. And the trouble is governments are not always logical about the way in which they apply legislation, and that legislation could in the future penalize diesel for some reason. So I think we need to, at this point, just be aware that the governments and the press seem to be demonizing diesel incorrectly, in my opinion, when it's considered against petrol. So we need to be aware of that and to start considering in our own minds and modeling on TCOs with the help of experts the changes that might occur, not only to the cost of diesel, but also to any taxation that might come in that penalizes diesel over petrol, and what impact that would have on residual values as well. So I don't think we should be caught by surprise if there is a significant change in attitude by the governments towards diesel. So Stephen, to answer your question, fuel I think will go up in the future. It really can only go in one direction. It's so low at the moment. But the other one is just to be aware that there may well be taxation that changes the diesel. Not to make any moves right now, but to start thinking about it and to start asking your experts what they think and what would you do if the legislation changed. Remember, taxation is quite a large proportion of the TCO, that could, and fuel is a large proportion of TCO, so that could have an impact in the future.
Okay. There is a second question for Denis, and so once again, Denis, please be clear and short in your answer. The question is related to the presentation where you, let's say, one of the conclusions or the interpretations from the participants is that you are telling that diesel is not, let's say, so bad as it was before and as it is pictured by some media and some governments. Now, what we also saw in your presentation is that the choice has to be made also country by country. Now, in some countries, for example, Belgium, there is a concept, a notion of the eco score, where there is, let's say, a total image, a total view on the pollution of a car. And within that concept, diesel cars are less attractive than petrol cars. So the question is, what is really greener if you look at a diesel or a petrol car? And in knowing, for example, that some countries are having incentives, let's say, or are promoting petrol cars, why can't leasing companies, let's say, evaluate the residual value of petrol cars a little bit more attractive so that also those types of cars can be taken into the car policy easier and so that the TCO can be more interesting? Denis?
Okay, so there are several questions. I will answer the first one first on pollution. I'm taking the Euro 6 norms to evaluate new diesel vehicle, and as a norms, it speaks for itself. So compared to the previous Euro norms, the Euro 5 of 2009, the Euro 6 where the vehicle has to be compliant of Euro 6 norms until September 2015. It was released for September 2014 with 1 year delay, or not delay, but with 1 year to be in place. Now all the vehicles since September 2015 are compliant with Euro 6 norms, and again they strongly diminish the amount of pollution of a diesel vehicle. The particulate at one point, it's a bit polemical, but electric vehicle, when they brakes, the brake emits particulate. And in some cases, it emits more particulate from braking than from the exhaust of a Euro 6 diesel vehicle. So again, there is a lot of diesel bashing, I would say, which is not fair if we only take the Euro 6 vehicle. But of course, in the street, you have a mixture of 10 years of diesel vehicle, and we are only talking about few % of the total fleet today that runs under diesel Euro 6 norms. According to the residual value, I would say that's not the fleet choice to decide the residual value. It's the market itself that decide what is the future resale price of a used car. And the second-hand market is very competitive. So we, as leaser, try to be as close as possible as the expected market value of the used car would be in the contract duration. So how will the petrol used car market be in 3 years? We think that since it's individual that bought second-hand car vehicle, individuals will listen to the current diesel bashing, and there would be some reluctance to buy diesel vehicle in 3 years' time. But I'm sure that within 3 years, we will all be educated people and realize that diesel is not good or bad. It's some diesel in some situations that are bad, and other diesel in the same situation can be much better. And to answer the question of the green car or not so green car, again, a zero emission vehicle, electric or hydrogen vehicle in city center are the only non-polluting vehicle in city center. So it's not petrol or diesel that matters, but alternative energy.
Okay, a final question. You also mentioned in your presentation, and we saw it, you mentioned some examples, France and the Netherlands. And you underlined also the importance of tax. Now, we are here in a community with international fleet managers. So for the IFMI, we think it's an important topic to raise. Why is it an important question to ask yourself as a fleet manager if it's the right time to go for diesel or for petrol, knowing that a lot of elements are embedded, let's say, in a more country-wise situation and philosophy?
Well, it's the good time because it's a question where you should have an educated answer. So if the answer is I've calculated and then one energy in my context is better than the other, at least you know. But because parameters are changing very fast, because you need to redo on a regular basis this type of calculation, it's always accurate to reassess each energy against the other on a regular basis because tax are moving fast, because oil price is moving fast, because residual value market is moving fast too. So you need to be able to reassess your fuel policies based on those facts on a regular basis.
Okay. Thank you very much, Denis. We have come to the end of the webinar. As said, there will be a recorded version of the webinar that will be online on our website, fleeteurope.com, and also on the dedicated IFMI website, ifmifleeteurope.com. There will also be a satisfaction survey that we will send to you so that we hear your remarks and we can optimize the next webinar. And then, of course, related also a little bit to the topic that we handled today, there is our next IFMI session. It's not a webinar. So the sound quality will be good. It will be a full-day training session in Rome on the 18th of November, where we will go into the TCO equation when selecting alternative powertrains. So we will, let's say, move from diesel and petrol to hybrid, hydrogen, full electric vehicles, and see how they can be of added value for your fleet management and what is the cost effectiveness of those type of powertrains. So we hope that we can meet you all in Rome, and we all wish you a nice day. Thank you very much for your attention, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.